morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. And we encourage everybody to follow us because we have a lot to cover here on the network where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. Let's get started on what's on the docket. First up, I want to let you know that it has just been announced that Roger Stone, a longtime aide and you could say informal consultant to President Trump, has just been arrested by the FBI. This is following an indictment by Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office. He has been indicted on 7 counts, including obstruction of justice, making false statements, and witness intimidation. It's going to be very interesting to see how this ultimately relates to the larger Russia probe, but it seems to be that this indictment is related to his contacts in relation to the WikiLeaks issue. This has been a very, very interesting case to follow. Mr. Stone himself has said in the past that he will not turn on President Trump despite the pressure put on him, and that he believed he was going to be indicted by Mueller's office. If we have more information, we're going to let you know, and it should also be noted that we believe he will make an appearance today at 11 a.m. at a federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale. Very interesting development indeed. Now, let's focus on some other issues that are happening around the news today. So here's a special report about what else is trending in the country right now.
Here are this morning's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. Kidnapping victim Jamie Kloss will receive the $25,000 reward that was offered for information about her disappearance. Hormel Foods offered the money as a reward when Kloss disappeared last October. Kloss's parents, James and Denise Kloss, were Hormel employees. Suspect Jake Patterson is charged with their deaths and Jamie's kidnapping. A close friend of missing Colorado mom Kelsey Barrett says Barrett and her alleged killer had a rocky relationship. Ashley Cogburn told CBS News that Barrett was often upset and that Patrick Frazee, her fiancé, was, quote, always mad about something. Cogburn says Frazee was demeaning and emotionally abusive toward Barrett. Barrett has been missing since Thanksgiving of last year. Frazee is behind bars and charged with Barrett's murder. He has not yet filed a plea. R&B singer Chris Brown is suing a French woman for defamation after she alleged he raped her in a hotel earlier this month. The New York Post reports that Brown's complaint was filed with the Paris Public Prosecutor's Office. The complaint says the woman made false allegations about the incident. The woman's lawyer told the Associated Press that Brown forced her into a hotel closet where she was allegedly raped by Brown and 2 other men. Brown has been active on Instagram, and some of his recent posts allude to the accusation. They include a screen grab of his clothing company's post showing a T-shirt indicating the woman is lying. Brown was released without charges earlier this week. Those are today's top crime stories. This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
Never a dull moment, even on a Friday. Aaron, thanks so much for great reporting, and go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. Now, one of the trials that we've been following, it will be dark today, no live feed here in that courtroom, but it's an interesting case that we've been following. Is out of California. It's the Charles Merritt trial, the McStay family murder case. Here's another special report talking a little bit more about this trial.
Charles Merritt is facing murder charges for allegedly killing a family of 4 and burying their bodies in the desert. Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph McStay Jr. vanished from their Southern California home on February 4, 2010. Police found no evidence of struggle or foul play, but did identify signs that the family left in a hurry. The family car was found 4 days later abandoned at the Mexican border with no sign of the McStays. Law enforcement eventually believed the family fled to Mexico. Surveillance video at the border showed a family of 4 resembling the McStays crossing the border on foot. Officers also found search history on the family computer about travel to Mexico and passports for children. But a grisly discovery came nearly 4 years later when an off-road motorcyclist discovered the partial remains of a child's skull on the outskirts of the Mojave Desert. A search revealed 2 shallow graves containing the remains of 3 more bodies. DNA and dental records matched the bodies to that of the McStay family. A 3-pound sledgehammer was buried with the bodies. The family had been bludgeoned to death, according to prosecutors. As law enforcement was investigating the McStay's family disappearance, San Diego detectives interviewed Charles Merritt, a business partner of Joseph McStay. According to the affidavit, it was determined that Merritt was the last person to see and talk to Joseph alive. The two had met at a fast food restaurant before the family went missing. The last cell phone activity on Joseph's phone was a call to Charles Merritt. Merritt's DNA was also found on the family car abandoned at the border on the steering wheel, the gear shift, and the radio. He claimed he never driven the car, but rode in the passenger seat with Joseph 6 weeks prior to when the family went missing. Charles Merritt is pleading not guilty to the charges. Defense attorneys are pointing to another business associate as a possible suspect. Merritt is facing 4 counts of murder. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel. And yesterday was a really emotional day in the courtroom because what we saw were items of evidence collected from those grave sites, from those 2 shallow graves. Really disturbing images. At one point, we believe Summer McStay's mother had to leave the courtroom because of the images that were being shown. So we are going to talk more about that trial a little bit later, but let's focus right now on our other trial that we were live in, and it has concluded. Do you remember we have been covering the Claudia Hoerig case out of Ohio, the woman charged with the aggravated murder of her husband, Air Force Reserve Major Carl Hoerig, who it's believed that she shot in March of 2007 multiple times, then fled to Brazil. She was extradited back to the United States over 10 years later and finally faced criminal prosecution. Well, a jury of her peers didn't take too long. She was found guilty of aggravated murder, and right now on the program, we are going to understand how they came to that decision. And one of the things that you have to imagine they considered is when Claudia Hoerig, the defendant herself, took the stand. Let's play some of that right now.
They buy cheap clothes, lots of it.
When Carl was home and you guys were in the house, did he have specific requirements for what you wear?
Yes. Basically, I could only wear a skirt, short skirt with heels. He liked that pom-pom heel, but I could wear other shoes as long as it was high heel, open toes, and just a very small top. During the day, but if it was other times it was later at night, I had to walk around just in heels, no clothes, naked.
And why did you put up with all of this?
I wanted really to be married. I wanted to make him happy. I was used to high demand. I came from that kind of background that, people were hard on me in my life, and I kind of was used to high demand, and he wasn't. The demand, what he did was different, but the demand, I was always used to meet people's demands. So he was a very demanding man, and I thought that over time he was going to mellow out. He was older, he was 40, I was 40. People get set in their ways. I thought even over time he was going to let go of those weird things that he did. I thought he was going to change. Sleep deprivation. He would make me run miles, and then he would leave me out in the middle of the woods in Newton Falls, dark like 6 p.m., and then disappear. I would freak out and start running real fast because I was scared that he left me behind. So I started running. I was pregnant, and I guess that it wasn't good. It was early pregnancy. He would do that and he wanted me to get in real good shape. He made me to work out with weights, and he was like a personal trainer while I was pregnant. I guess all of this made me have the miscarriage.
Okay. So you had a miscarriage?
I did have a miscarriage, yes, in the middle of the night, and I woke him up and said, Carl, I'm feeling a lot of pain. I hadn't seen the blood. I'm having a lot of pain here, like I'm having my period. And then I sat in the bed, and then I looked down, and there was blood. I said, there was blood here, there was blood. I didn't think of it. I didn't have experience with it. There's blood, there was blood. It was the middle of the night. He said, okay, we'll go to the doctor in the morning. And we went to the doctor.
That's Claudia Hoerig. Let's talk more about it with Jonna Spilbor. Now, Jonna, she just goes on to bash Carl Hoerig. She talks about him being emotionally abusive and making her wear these skimpy outfits and all these things. How much does this matter?
Well, look, she killed this man, and part of her defense is basically that she snapped, and the reason she snapped is because he was horrible to her. What she's describing on the stand right now doesn't rise to the level of horrible, in my opinion, Jesse. You know, he's a husband who wanted her to dress sexy. Okay. There's an issue about whether she should have an abortion or not. I can understand a couple having that discussion at some point if the situation warranted. What she's not describing is, you know, did he beat her on a daily basis? What else did he do to prevent her from having a life or getting a job or those sort of things, which are sort of what you would expect to hear from somebody who murdered her husband.
But if you're trying to argue as the defense, she had an emotional disturbance. You know, at that very moment, she just got enraged at everything that you said, and it was all building up. Is that a way that could help her case?
You know, I don't see it, because what she's describing doesn't rise to that level. You're going to have 12 people sitting in a jury box who may have had far more egregious situations with their own spouses, and their spouses are still alive. It either has to escalate and we need more information, or her defense is really going to fall flat, as we know it did.
What do you just think of her on the stand, her demeanor, the way she's acting?
Well, you got... her demeanor is her demeanor. You have to remember, there's a lot of time and space between the incident and today, because she had a good run, Jesse. She took off for 9 or 10 years and lived the life she wanted to live. So it's not immediate. It didn't happen yesterday. So I don't blame her for having a demeanor that's a little bit flat as well.
Okay, well, we have a lot more to talk about with Ms. Hoerig, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll take a look more at her taking the stand. We'll be right back. Well, there's just certain things that you never think you're going to hear in a courtroom, and that's what you hear. Okay, do you think a part of the defense strategy was like, Claudia, we're going to put you on the stand, go?
Oh, no, because that would be horrible, and it kind of is horrible, Jesse. What this woman is describing is grounds for divorce, not grounds for killing your husband. And the more she opens her mouth, the clearer it becomes that there has not yet been anything so egregious that would cause her to snap and be a defense to murder.
Well, she clearly has a lot to say.
Oh, boy.
She's been very vocal about her treatment in jail, about her extradition. She, at one point, says she's not going to get a fair trial because this is not Brazil. So you can only imagine what happened when the prosecution had its day to cross-examine her. Take a look.
Now you're feeling betrayed. He's told you twice now he doesn't want the baby. He gets out of the shower and you're going to commit suicide, right?
I was trying to get his attention.
You weren't going to kill yourself, though, right?
That was plan B. My plan A is for us to work out things between us.
So we're still on plan A at that point, correct?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So he comes out and tells you again, you said he grabbed you and pushed you down, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you'd agree, like I asked you earlier, there's no way that Carl Hoerig can dispute or admit or even deny that he did that day, correct?
Correct.
The only witness and the only person who can tell us that, what happened in that house on March 12th, is you.
Correct.
All right. Now, you kept trying to talk him into the baby even after he pushed you down, correct?
I didn't talk about baby anymore. I just asked for us to talk more. He said he was done talking.
And he turned around and walked away.
Yeah, he turned around. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. And
yes
he
or
made
no?
a statement.
These are very easy questions. Did he turn around and walk away from you?
He did.
All right. And at that point, did he say to you, now let's go back a minute here. Prior to that, you told him you were trying to keep the baby. You told him you'd take care of it, correct?
Yeah.
All right. You told him that, well, you told this jury yesterday that you already had a boyfriend on Match.com, correct? That Bruce. Mm-hmm. You still had your condo in New York, correct? Mm-hmm. You had already talked about getting a job back in New York with your old accounting firm, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever tell the detective how long you'd be willing to do in prison?
No, I never did.
Now, did you tell the detective that you knew you would be convicted?
No, I never did.
Okay, you didn't in that?
Oh, okay. I said that I was sure that I was going to be convicted here, but in Brazil would be a fair trial, and there I don't know if I would or not.
I didn't ask you. I asked if you would. You told him you thought you would be convicted.
Here? Yeah, because it's not a fair court.
Stop right there. Now, did you tell the detective what happened on March 12th?
Yes, I did.
And did you tell him that you shot and killed your husband?
I did.
And you expected to be convicted of that?
No, I didn't expect it. I said that given the lies, I would be convicted.
All right, Jonna, one of the things that the prosecutor, I believe, mentioned is the fact that she seemed very sad, very crying on the stand, very emotional when speaking about her family in Brazil, but didn't show 1 ounce of remorse about shooting Carl Hoerig.
I think that's an unfair question by the prosecutor, to be honest with you. Now, I'm not a fan of this defendant because I don't see her having really a valid defense to this killing. But whether or not she shows remorse is really a personal matter. And again, Jesse, like I said, this didn't happen yesterday when we would tend to be more emotional about something, right? It happened a decade ago. So, and who's to say what people act like when somebody close to them, and she killed him. I mean, she killed him and then ran away for 10 years.
Yeah, the prosecution, though, and you correct me if I'm wrong, if you're on the side where you really want to go after somebody, is that, does emotions take over because he was really pressing her?
And again, I think emotions could take over when you are closer in time to that which is causing you to get emotional.
I mean by the prosecutor. Does his emotions take over and just keep going on her? At one point he yelled at her, he goes, I asked the questions.
Well, you know, there is always a relationship between the person asking the questions and the person answering them. And we've seen plenty of times where one attorney or the other could get heated because of the conduct of the person on the stand. She does not come across as a likable defendant. And one of the things maybe we'll get to talk about later this morning is I fully expected a battered woman syndrome defense here. The judge cut that off.
They couldn't get an expert on.
And now we know, but I think also because the facts just don't rise to that level. So and that's probably part of the problem.
In other words, they couldn't get an expert to come on and say, hey, this is a classic case of it.
Exactly. And when you can't pay somebody to say what you want them to say, that's not the defense you should take. But they tried to take it anyway.
Yeah, and they kept saying that this was not a prior calculated murder. This was not planned out. This is something that was in the heat of the moment. But it seemed as if almost they didn't believe that. Did you get that sense?
Not only, yes, I got that sense, but not only, it seems like it was exactly the opposite. What's coming out of her mouth is, you know, over time, I hated him more, and I hated him more, and here's why, and then one day, boom, I killed him.
Well, at one point, the prosecutor says, before you shot Carl Hoerig, were you upset at this? And he kept repeating that phrase. Before you shot him, were you upset at this? And I guess that's trying to establish what exactly?
That's trying to establish that it was more of a passionate crime, a heat of passion crime, than a premeditated crime.
Or the prosecutor was at least thinking she had motivation before any of this happened. We'll talk more about it. Let's take a quick break. And there's obviously a lot to discuss in the Claudia Hoerig trial. We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, prior calculation and design has been proved to you beyond any and all reasonable doubt. The facts in this case are very, very straightforward and simple. She's not guilty of an inferior offense of manslaughter. Saying don't kill yourself and get blood on my pictures is no reason to kill anybody. She did murder him. She purposely did it, but she did it with prior calculation and design. This case is overflowing with prior calculation and design. From buying the gun, transferring the money, to all those bad things she thought about and told you about, to practicing with the gun, to walking down those steps after she shot him twice already and putting that gun to his head 12 to 24 inches. Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant is guilty beyond any and all possible doubt of aggravated murder as she stands charged in this indictment and the specification of using a firearm to do it. I'm going to take this last moment to thank you again for your time, your patience, and your service to Trumbull County. And I will leave you with this thought. Each and every one of you speaks for the kind of justice system we have in this country and in this county. You speak for Carl Merritt.
Objection.
Okay, let's talk about this right now. One of the things that he said is that this isn't manslaughter because that statement, if allegedly made by Carl Hoerig, if you're going to shoot yourself, do it in the basement so you don't get any blood on the artwork. He said that's not provocation. Is that true?
I agree with it. Yeah, that's not sufficient provocation. He needed to hammer home, this prosecutor, and he did, the fact that this murder was planned and premeditated in order to get a first-degree murder charge. And I can understand that if somebody said to you, it was very flippant and said, oh, kill yourself someplace else, that would hurt your feelings? Yes. Does it rise to the level of something that gives you a pass to pull a trigger 10 to 24 inches from somebody's head and kill them? No, it doesn't. Prosecution is correct here.
What if you combine that with, if you believe her, the history of anguish that she suffered at the hands of Carl Hoerig? Is that why they put that evidence in? To justify that comment?
Well, the anguish that this defendant described, to be honest with you, Jesse, I think fell flat on the jury because she's not describing anything that is so egregious that millions of other couples probably have had worse discussions. People who don't like each other and who stay married, which to me is what she described on that stand, does not give rise to a defense to murder. And it was easy for the prosecution to convince the jury of that.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting to see how this worked. And we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to play you the defense's closing argument. And remember, this is their last attempt to try to convince that jury that this woman is not guilty of aggravated murder. We'll be right back.
Like I told you from the start, she got up and she went to Brazil. I told you exactly how it happened. The evidence says exactly how it happened. There's a whole string of phone calls in the records, in the phone records, from her to family in Brazil. She says she tried to go back and kill herself, but the two bullets she thought she had in the gun, she didn't. So she walks in the basement, reloads the gun. Where's the gun found? The gun's found, cocked, loaded, ready to use in the suicide. Consistent with her story that she called her family, they told her not to commit suicide. So she did. But she said she was all ready. Now, I'm not a theologian, but you can take your own memories and understand. Many places, many religions consider committing suicide the ultimate sin, and you can't be buried in hallowed ground. Murder's bad, suicide's worse. Her family tells her, look, don't commit suicide, come home, we'll deal with this, we're going to be supportive. There's a lawyer saying Ohio has the death.
Well, it's never good when the defense attorney maybe accidentally uses the word murder in his closing argument, but even so, what he's saying is this was not a prior calculated murder. This was something that happened in the heat of the moment. Well, let's see what the jury decided, because yesterday we saw them hand down their verdict against Claudia Hoerig. Take a look.
We, the jury, in this case, duly impaneled and sworn or affirmed, find the defendant, Claudia C. Hoerig, guilty of aggravated murder as she stands charged in the first count of the indictment, dated this date, signed by all 12 jurors. As to the specification, we, the jury, in this case, duly impaneled and sworn or affirmed, find the defendant, Claudia C. Hoerig, did, at the time of committing aggravated murder, have a firearm on or about her person under her control, brandished the firearm, indicated that she possessed it or used it to facilitate the offense, again dated this date and signed by all 12 jurors. Ms. Fowler, did I properly read the verdict of your jury? Anything further from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further from the defendant?
No, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, again.
Okay, so she was found guilty of aggravated murder. We weren't surprised by this, were we, Jonna? What do you think?
No, we were not surprised at all. In fact, I was even less surprised when I was listening to the defense's closing argument. So the defense goes on to say that this woman was mentally unstable because of all the mistreatment she had over the years. And in fact, moments before she killed her husband, she was threatening to kill herself. And I think it's not lost on the jury that she's in a room with a gun. She made a threat to kill herself. She wigs out because her husband says, yeah, go ahead and do it, but just don't do it around here because you're going to make a mess. And instead of killing herself, which she had the means and she threatened to do, she turns the gun on him and just keeps shooting.
I think we got a report that one of the jurors had spoken up after the verdict and said the big issue for them was the idea, why would you buy a gun with a laser sight to kill yourself? You know, why buy that weapon?
See how smart juries are?
Yeah, they can see through this. I mean, the idea that she bought the weapon, she fired it, she practiced with it, you know, to kill herself. And then there was a whole discussion of her on the stand talking about, oh, I wanted to make sure I did it the right way, that I didn't, the recoil wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, that's not what you're thinking of. I imagine that's not what you're thinking of. You're trying to kill yourself. And if she tried to kill herself by taking pills and driving off the road, I mean, it just doesn't seem that she would put that much thought into killing herself. She put that much thought into killing her husband.
Yeah, and they weren't buying it any which way.
No.
John, I want you to stand by because we're going to take a break, but on the other side, we're going to now focus on the Charles Merritt case, the McStay family murder trial. Really interesting day in the courtroom for the past 2 days. We heard his police interrogation tape back in 2010, 13 days after the family went missing, and we also saw really disturbing items of evidence at these two grave sites and had a better understanding of what may have happened to this family. And it should be noted that the body of Joseph McStay appeared to be in a very different state than everyone else. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime.
For half an hour until they lost interest in whatever they were going to go about doing something else. It was, oh my God. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the cell phone and trying to call him.
Yeah.
Do you remember if this happened, if it did happen, when it went directly voicemail as opposed to ringing and then going to voicemail?
I have not called him a single time that it didn't go voicemail.
Oh, so every time you call him,
It went to voicemail.
it goes right to voicemail. He didn't answer his phone.
He didn't answer his phone, but every time I stopped trying to call him, I don't remember what day, but I don't even remember what day, but I stopped trying to call him because Mikey or his mom or somebody had told me his message box is full. Okay? But the last time I tried to call him, I left it.
Okay, let's break some of this down right now with Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. Now, you and I had talked about this case. A lot of people say there's not enough against Merritt. You know, the motive doesn't seem strong. But the other way of looking at it is he had the opportunity, the access, the ability to do this, and there was some shady behavior from him.
There was, but I still don't think, as of yet, I am not seeing the prosecution reaching their threshold of beyond a reasonable doubt. And here's for all the reasons that you said. There just seems to be, when you look at this case, something just isn't adding up. The motive is not that strong. We're not talking about millions and millions of dollars. And for me, and not just because I'm a lawyer, or maybe because I'm a woman, for me, for someone to have the wherewithal, for lack of a better word, to kill two tiny children over a business deal, just to me that doesn't make sense. It's mind-boggling.
Well, my response is that A, we've seen people kill for less, and B, maybe the plan, and again we're speculating, is to maybe Joseph McStay was the primary target, and then you had to cover it up by killing the rest of the family.
But and that's one theory. And again, I don't know if it gets us beyond a reasonable doubt. We hear things all the time about horrible cartel people, right? Who could kill anybody? They could kill their own grandmother. When I see that, you know, 2 tiny children were killed, my mind immediately goes to a culprit like that. And we also know that there is a valid third-party defense here that the judge isn't really letting in, and that's going to be a mistake. And if this man is convicted, that'll be a tremendous ground for appeal.
You're referring to Daniel Kavanaugh,
yes.
This other business associate
Yes.
of Joseph McStay. Some of the communications between him and the victim might not be put in, but they can still introduce that defense and point the finger at Daniel Kavanaugh.
Yep.
Again, but it's the same thing. Another business associate who wanted some money from Joseph McStay kills the entire family?
And I hear that, and it's another business associate who had words come out of his mouth basically saying, we'll find your bones in the desert. And what happened? We found bones in the desert. Mean guy.
Well, we have a lot to talk about, don't we? Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll dissect more of what happened this week in the Charles Merritt case. Stay tuned.
She's very, very difficult. He always said, no, she's just Colombian, you know. And he talked all the time about her being Colombian as it's something positive, you know, my little Colombian girl. And I'm like,
Speaking of Colombian, does she have friends or family or connections with people in Colombia?
I have no idea. All I know is she's Colombian because he always said she was Colombian. I always assumed that she was just Colombian by descent, and American, but you know. But he was always just very positive.
Okay, that's the defendant on tape. Now, Jonna, you tell me, is it a signal of guilt when somebody uses the past tense when we don't know what happened to the whole family?
I mean, obviously that's where the police are trying to go with that. But also, Jesse, I mean, logically speaking, and he basically said this, he's like, there's no reason for him to disappear. So if police want to talk to you, somebody's disappeared, it's natural almost to process that person or the family is dead, and that's why you would refer to them almost inadvertently in the past tense.
Suspicious, though, no? They were only missing for a little bit.
Maybe, but then listen to his affect. He doesn't sound nervous at all. He doesn't sound crazy. Like, he sounds a little bit believable at that early stage in the investigation.
Okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. It's going to be up to the jury. Let's see what he had to say more about Joseph McStay and his wife, Summer.
A super nice guy. I mean, he'll give you the shirt off his back. I mean, he'll do anything for you. And Summer's just the opposite. You know, she's taking the shirt. Well, I don't know so much about that, but she won't give up anything. You know, what's hers is hers, and what's hers is going to stay hers. And Joseph is more like, you need what? There you go. Oh, I mean, I've got, you know, mine and Joseph's running tab is $10,000. He owes me $10,000. I owe him $15,000. If he owes me $5,000, I owe him $15,000. You know, it just goes. And Summer never liked that because, you know, it was never. It was just always a running tab. You know, if I needed money, I pick up the phone and say, "Hey, dude, I need a couple of $1,000." If he needed something done, he picks up the phone. Hey, dude, I need, you know, we got it done. Whatever it was, we got it done.
Are you having any financial problems?
We've been having financial problems for 6, 7 months, 8 months.
Why is that?
Well, it's just business has been, it almost dropped right out from under us for like 3 months. There was almost no sales at all, and that killed us financially. My heart attack didn't help much.
Okay, so there he's admitting that he has financial problems, which is a motive by the prosecution for what he allegedly did here. The question that I have, if you believe, Jonna, that the killings happened in the McStay family home, would your view on this defendant be different?
Yes and no. If the killings happened in the family home, I think we would have much more forensic and physical evidence to connect those two dots between this defendant and the killing. And again, here, the problem I'm having with this case is that we just don't have a straight line. We don't have a lot pointing to this defendant.
Well, what we saw yesterday, which was interesting, was the sledgehammer that was found with the bodies had paint on it, or it appeared to be paint. And remember, they were painting their house at the time. And then one of the other things is they had no shoes on. Their bodies were found with no shoes, which would indicate that they were in their home. It seemed that there was more evidence pointing to the fact that the killings happened in the house than it did in the Mojave Desert. But then again, the lead investigator in this case, is, in his opinion, he doesn't believe the killings happened in the home. So what's a jury supposed to do here?
Exactly. A jury might not be able to get to the point where they can believe one story or the other beyond a reasonable doubt. And don't forget, we also have some video footage of what we think is a family voluntarily crossing into another country, which also begs a question, Jesse. Why do you go to another country that way if you're not going on vacation?
Well, the investigators have tried to rule that out and said it wasn't actually the family, but it's going to be up to the jury once again to decide what to believe. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear the testimony of Detective Edward Bachman, who is a lead investigator from San Bernardino. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're still analyzing the Charles Merritt case from this past week, and it's been a very interesting case to follow. One of the items of evidence, or one of the pieces of evidence that the prosecution is saying ties Merritt to the actual crime scene, the gravesite where these bodies were found, was that there were these two sets of tracks, and police say that one of the tracks matches the type of truck that Merritt was driving. We learned a little bit more about this from Detective Edward Bachman, who's the lead investigator in San Bernardino. He testified this week. Let's see what he had to say.
We heard from Sergeant Avila about the documentation of some, I'm going to use the term loosely, tire impressions in the dirt area near grave A and B. Were you shown those?
I was.
Okay. Did you happen to examine those and get familiar with them?
I did.
So we heard from Sergeant Avila the approximate measurements of each and their location to grave A and B. What I want to ask you is something different, which is when you're looking at it in the context of the scene, what was significant to you about them?
Based on the layout of the tire impressions, it appeared that the soil at the time that they were caused would have been soft because they sank down below ground level. At the time when we drove out there at the scene was dry, and there wasn't a noticeable depression in the ground like there was when we examined the tire impressions that we believe backed up to both graves.
So is depression a better word than impression?
I would say so, yeah, because it's something that's pushed down into the ground.
Based on that observation and opinion, did you do any research about weather conditions on or near February 4th, 2010?
We did.
And what did you find?
We learned that at the time...
Here's that foundation.
Sustained excavation of the gravesite. Was any other material besides that appeared to be wrapped around the remains located in grave A?
Located the victim's fingernails down on the bottom of the grave, the tire straps, the tie down, the electrical cord, the blanket, and then the victim's clothing.
Was there any towel-like or material located around the gravesite A, at least within a reasonable distance?
There was. It was visible around the area.
And would that have been documented by Ms. Radliff as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Jonna, before we get into the items of evidence that were found, the idea that there may be tire tracks matching that of Merritt's truck, and the fact there's evidence going to be put forward that perhaps his cell phone had pinged in the area 2 days after the family went missing, is that enough to convict somebody?
Again, not enough to convict in and of itself. What the prosecution is really going to have to go for here is when you have any amount of, let's just call it weak evidence, for lack of a better word, right? It's not, there's no smoking gun, but we have little tiny pieces of evidence that he's going to have to string together, and the weaker the evidence, the more of it you need in order to get over the beyond a reasonable doubt threshold. So those are just going to be another couple of items. He's going to need more, Jesse. He really is going to need more.
As you can see, we're showing you photos from those grave sites, and we really learned a lot about it yesterday. Let's continue on with Detective Bachman, where he's going to talk about these graves. Now, one thing to note, Grave A contained Joseph Sr. and Joseph Jr. and Grave B, Summer and Gianni. Let's go live. Let's go play testimony from earlier this week.
Hey, do you remember?
There were a handful of different folks on both days.
Did Becky Burnell work with you on the 12th?
I believe that was one of the folks that was assigned on the first day of November 12th.
Mike Shea?
Yes, sir.
And Janine Rondon?
Yes, sir.
You guys measured the grave at some point when you were completed?
We did.
And it was 7'1", does that sound about right?
I think it was 71 inches.
Now, counsel showed you the picture of the soil depression before the excavation started.
Yes, sir.
That depression was measured at 3 different locations, was it not?
It was.
And do you remember those measurements?
I think it was approximately toward the north end, was roughly 3 inches. I think at the center, the way my report reads is, at the center it was roughly 4 inches, and then at the south end it was 6 inches.
The next day, on the 13th, when you went back, the team was able to make more progress, obviously uncovering who ended up being Joseph McStay, correct?
That's correct.
And we saw some of the pictures for that?
Yes, sir.
Now, you talked about the body was wrapped in a cloth-woven blanket.
Correct.
And that's how you described it in your report multiple times. It was a cloth-woven blanket, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the cord that was wrapped around Joseph McStay's neck.
Yes, sir.
Does that cord connect to the same cord that can be seen around the waist area?
It did.
And the cord around the neck, it was tied on the outside of the blanket, correct?
I would have to look at photos to say for certain, sir.
Now, there's mention of the tire compressions or depressions leading up to both graves A and B. Do you remember that part of the discussion?
Yes, sir.
Now, those tire depressions, they were measured at some point, were they not?
They were.
And were you present when they were measured?
I believe I was, yes.
And was Heatherly Ratliff involved in the measurement of those tire pressures?
I would say yes, because I believe I remember her taking overall photographs of the tape measure while the measurements were taken.
And were you involved in the measurement of those tire depressions going to both graves?
Yes, I would have been present while that was taking place.
And did you agree with the measurements, how they're being done, like the placement of the tape measure ends and the determination of the width?
Agreed, how so?
Like you didn't say, no, that's not right, that's not right. Were you agreeing with what everybody was kind of seeing?
I think based off of that, we were trying to take an approximate measurement. There was no tread pattern that was visible at that point. So we were trying to just take an overall approximate measurement of the actual depressions and stuff.
I understand, but did you state any objection to the process for which it was done or the determinations that were made?
I don't believe so, no, sir.
Jonna, let's talk about the crime scene. Okay, let's talk about what was found. One of the strangest aspects that we learned is that it appears only Joseph McStay was the only one wrapped up in something, that he was wrapped up in a blanket and tied with an electrical cord, possibly around his neck. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, what happened? How do you have 4 bodies and he's the only one wrapped up?
You know, maybe we can assume that he was really the target of this crime and his family was, collateral damage, so to speak. And maybe, and again, I know there has been no evidence thus far that this could have been conducted by a cartel. But when you look at torture, when you look at an entire family, when you look at the fact that they're across the American border in Mexico, I mean, I can imagine that maybe he was tied, and because he had to watch the rest of his family get killed, or vice versa. I mean, there was something special, and I'm putting that in air quotes, about the head of this household being murdered that elicited this type of evidence.
Even though the prosecution hasn't officially addressed this and put this into evidence to the jury, we have been reading this case, and there was a thought that Summer McStay may have been raped, especially seeing the presence of the pants and the underwear.
Right.
If that's the case, what's going on?
See, doesn't that, to me, Jesse, that almost dispels, that helps the defendant and dispels that money was a motive. This is the prosecution case is money was a motive. Now, we know that there's not a ton of money. I mean, you know, it's a significant amount, but it's not enough to commit murder, I would say, if I were representing this defendant. And if that's the case, why are you raping your friend's wife? It doesn't add up.
And then I want to talk later with you about the sledgehammer found there as well. But in the meantime, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to hear the testimony of Dr. Alexis Gray, the forensic anthropologist. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the grave site right now in the Charles Merritt trial from this past week. We learned a lot of different details from that grave site because it helps tell a story of what ultimately happened to this family of four. We saw the testimony of Dr. Alexis Gray, a forensic anthropologist who thoroughly analyzed these two shallow graves where the bodies were found. Let's listen to her about a little bit more of what happened.
Remains which then should have fluttered, and then I had seen some remains sticking out that I thought probably indicated a fourth.
Okay. You indicated that you saw some remains sticking out. Do you recall whether they were sticking out of grave A or grave B?
Well, you would have to tell me which one we designated as grade A or grade B. I don't remember.
So if the one in front of you, if we looked at that and said that's grave B.
Okay, grade B. Then it would be grade A.
Now, when you do this quick canvass, how worried are you about contaminating anything around you in terms of potential evidence?
Moderately. I mean, you have to weigh our need to get over a large distance versus preserving absolutely everything. In the desert, that's not possible anymore. So many factors have come in, from animals to weather to other people, you know, coming through and all of that. The idea that you would have a pristine scene is something that you have to discard very early on.
Well, as you're walking around that day, can you tell us, you indicated that you saw tire tracks leading up to this particular grave that we see in the picture. Did you see other things indicative of animal activity?
Yes.
Did you see other tracks or things of indicative of maybe people riding dirt bikes or driving through there?
Yes.
Did you see other things indicative of footprints or anything like that?
I don't think I saw anything in terms of footprints. There was general cultural debris. Anytime you're out in the desert, there are cans and shotgun shells and all of this unrelated material that you kind of keep an eye on in case it turns out to be related, but most of the time you kind of walk past it, skirt it.
So as you go to this scene and you ultimately do this quick canvass, you indicated you are not dealing with a pristine crime scene at this point.
That is correct.
So if this is not a pristine crime scene, when you're walking around observing this, are you picking up items?
No, occasionally I'll pick up animal remains because I want to get them out of the field of play, if you will. And every once in a while you flip it over and make sure that you absolutely have an animal as opposed to some very unusual human.
Okay. I'm sure you've seen some unusual things.
I have.
Okay. So you determined that you're dealing with at least 2 adults and a child and potentially another victim because you see something sticking out of the other grave, which we'll for now call grave A. What do you and Deputy Avery decide to do?
I asked him to call it in, and we asked for a deputy who can stand watch over the area until a recovery can be mounted the next day, because it was winter, and I think by the time we found the second grave, it was later. It was past 1, past 2, and you certainly couldn't mount something that large before it got dark.
That's my fault. I didn't ask you that question. Do you know approximately what time it was that you responded to the scene that day?
No.
Okay.
I want to say 11. It could have been 1. It was around lunchtime.
Okay. So you...
Okay, Jonna, as we learn more about the grave sites, one thing just keeps bugging me. Why was the sledgehammer left with the bodies?
Well, most times when somebody is committing a crime and they have a murder weapon, they try to dispose of that murder weapon so there can be no connection between the person who commits the crime and the actual crime itself. In this case, if you're, meaning law enforcement, somebody is going to happen upon these bodies, and chances are it's a quick jump to determine that there was a crime involved, so what if the murder weapon is in that grave? Especially in a case like this, where it's years between the commission of the crime and the actual discovery of the crime. I don't see it as being as big a deal, unless you think, is it like a calling card?
If someone is going to drive out to the Mojave Desert and dump these bodies so no one finds them, why are you going to put the potential murder weapon right there? I believe Joseph Scott Morgan calls it connectivity.
Because if you think that nobody's going to find the bodies, then you may as well put the murder weapon in with the bodies that you think nobody's going to find.
I'm bothered by it. What can I say? I'm bothered by a lot in this case.
I know.
But let's move on now to John Bluth. He is the person who discovered the bodies in the Mojave Desert. So everybody just take a step and think about being in his shoes for a minute. Let's go back to his testimony from earlier this week.
How you handled that bone, if at all, when you discovered it or after you discovered it?
I believe I turned it over with the stick.
Okay. Did you recall ever like touching it, manipulating it, picking it up, throwing it?
No.
Okay. Did you meet with law enforcement at the dump gate entrance?
Yes.
What happened after that?
He followed me over to, I had a long piece of a bush that I had placed so I can remember where it was. And he followed me to there, and I walked it in.
Him being a deputy?
Yes.
After that, were you involved in this anymore? Did you do anything else?
No, we walked in there, walked up and down the little rivulet, and we went back to his car, and he called the forensic team because he wasn't sure too. And then we talked for a bit, and then he let me go.
Okay. You used a word, I don't know if I missed it or I didn't understand what you said, a rivulet?
Yeah, a little, like a channel where water goes through.
Okay.
A river, but you can tell water was going down a little. There's like hills.
Okay.
And this was a low point where that was.
Found what you believe was a human skull. You did not touch it?
No, not with my hand.
And when you found the human skull, you described you were in a rivulet. Is that right?
Can I object that he said one question, we're on two?
My apologies.
Well, I don't think it's like, not on a map, but it's just a contour of the land where it's a low point where water would go through.
And what were the weather conditions when you found what you believed was a human skull?
November-ish, partly cloudy, cold, windy probably a little bit.
And what were the ground conditions when you found it?
Right.
You know, it's amazing, Jonna, that they were able even to discover the bodies 3 years later because we would not be here. We would not have an answer. How many times do we have missing persons cases and you never find any answers?
I know, which I guess is what we call the quintessential break in the case. And then it was quickly determined that these people didn't die from any sort of natural cause, obviously, or animal activity. Well, there might have been animal activity afterwards, but they didn't die from that. So, yeah, without this break, where would we be?
The Mojave Desert is expansive. It's a desert. It's like throwing body parts in the ocean. The fact that you'd be able to discover this, I mean, it's still remarkable.
No, it is remarkable, and thankfully, but it also presents the incredible challenge for the prosecution in this case. Like I said, Jesse, and we've been going over this, there is no clear cut, there's no smoking gun, there's no direct line between the dots. It's very difficult. It's going to be difficult to get a conviction in this case.
Well, look, they have evidence that they want to present. We talked about the cell phone evidence pinging him in the area of the grave sites, the tire tracks. We believe this case is going to last months upon months, and we believe that it's going to be a battle of the experts a lot of the time, DNA experts, cell phone experts. How do you sit a jury and say, hey, listen, you're going to have to hear this trial, very difficult, for months on end? How does you find the proper jury for this case?
Well, you have to prep the jury when you're voir direing them, right? Because not only do you have to prep them that this is going to be a long, laborious case, but Jesse, you have to get the right people in that jury box who are going to be able to stomach the evidence, which includes the fact that a 3- and a 4-year-old were killed. But they also, that's from the prosecution standpoint. From the defense standpoint, you have to get people who can analyze the absence of evidence and determine whether or not they should then meet their threshold of beyond a reasonable doubt. This case involves more absence of evidence than actual evidence.
There's a jury of 4 men and 8 women. The battle of showing, we have to show evidence of this crime. We have to show the bodies and or what it looks like. How does it cross the line between it's becoming inflammatory? The prosecution is showing more than necessary.
I don't know if the prosecution really is going to run that risk here. I scream up and down a lot when I have cases where you're unnecessarily showing like very gruesome autopsy photos, for example, which of course you need to prove the manner of death in certain circumstances and the method, but sometimes those photos can leave an indelible mark on a juror that they never, ever forget. And sometimes it's not necessary to do that. Where if you're not dispelling or disputing the fact that somebody's dead and how they died. I don't see that same problem happening in this case.
Yeah, you make a good point, because so many times we're trying to understand if the person, what happened to them. And here that's what's happening. What happened to this family? Why are there inconsistencies in their, in their remains?
Right. But the question, answering the question who might have wanted them dead, or at least who might have wanted Mr. McStay dead, isn't enough. So again, it's an uphill climb for the prosecution here.
Jonna Spilbor, thanks so much for coming on.
I'm leaving. I forgot I was leaving. Always good to be with you.
Always great being with you. Thank you so much for your perspective. As always, have a great weekend. Okay, we're going to take a break, but we obviously have a lot to talk about from this past week with Merritt, Claudia Hoerig, and we are also going to focus on the breaking news of the day. But there are a lot of unexplained questions here in the Merritt case. So hopefully we can review the testimony from this past week, and maybe we can start putting together a picture of what really happened to this whole family. We'll be right back right after this.